Hello everyone, this is Reza and welcome to another video. In this one we're going to talk about walk cycle. We have two types of walk cycle, straight ahead walk cycle and pose to pose walk cycle, and the methodology and the approach is completely different. In this series we're going to talk about straight ahead humanoid walk cycle. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, before I start the session, let's go over a few reminders. Consider this as preparation for the scene. The first thing you need to keep in mind is how closely are you using your reference. Now, think about what type of walk cycle you would like to make, and the analysis of the cycle probably needs a video by itself, but just think about the movement, the pace of the cycle. Is it a happy cycle? Is it how it is going to convey emotion? So think about those things, and all of those personalities and emotions can really change the timing and the movement of each controllers. Second thing is to familiarize yourself with the rig if it's not yours. This example that I'm using, the rig is not mine. It's been done by the amazing Mr. Matt. So very simple, very easy to read, and I put the link below so you guys can access that. So know your rig. The third thing is to create a selection set if you don't have it. So you go to selection set, right click on it, and you select set members to have access to all of your controls. You don't need to select them one by one. That's going to take a very long time. So select all of your controls, and then you can go to create sets and quick selection set, create a button out of it, or place it here, or even you can go ahead and create character set. It doesn't matter what method you use, but you need to have that selection set to be able to select the controllers with no problem whatsoever. It's going to be fairly quick. Next is referencing. So think about if you animate the original scene or you would like to reference the rig into a master scene instead. It becomes important if you use this character in more than one scene. So think about it. If you do it, then in this case you may want to reference the rig rather than working on its original scene. Also, I want you to think about frame rate, and that is going to have an impact on the pace of your walk cycle. Is that a 24 frame per second or 25 frame per second or 30 frame per second? This is something that usually pipelines dictates to the animators, or the situation asks for it, and animators consider this before they start the walk cycle. Now, there are two reminders you need to be mindful of, and these last two are within Maya's user interface. The first one is evaluation mode. So if I go to preferences and go to animation, we have evaluation mode, and parallel is probably the best option. It gives you access to cache and this cached playback, which is absolutely fantastic, whereas the old-fashioned DG is not going to consider this cached playback. As you can see, it's been grayed off, and serial, while it's very thorough and calculates all the dependency nodes, it is usually very, very slow. So parallel is the most recent evaluation mode, and it's fantastic for any animation work, so make sure to consider that. And the last one is use increment savings, because you do find yourself in a situation where you save all the time. So use Ctrl-Alt-S to increment save your scene. All right, with those reminders out of the way, let's get started. All right, with this straight ahead approach, I'm usually going from the root out and put layers, basically sculpt the walk cycle. Now, before I start adding keyframes, so on and so forth, I just want to shape the character, pose the character the way that I imagine it. So it brings some sort of a flavor or personality into the default pose rather than having that boring T pose or A pose. It really helps a lot for me to get a good understanding of what that character is about and what the walk cycle is trying to convey. So I'm going to go to Sets, Control Set, right click, Set Members, and then press S. And I usually specify 28 frames and I start from frame 0 in straight ahead. Usually with pose to pose, I start from frame 1. I work with even numbers in straight ahead approach. And you would like to have another one right at the end, and of course we'll put another one in the middle. But for now, just one single frame right at the beginning with auto key on, and you start posing your character. All right, that looks good. Now I have the pose. Let's start from the root and put that axis Y movement in the root. Okay, so I'm going to go to side mode, and I have a key already on frame 0. Let's have a key on frame 28, and I'm going to have a key for the middle. So that's where the up position is. Then I'm gonna go in between of these two, frame 7, and bring this character down a little, maybe minus 0.4, and I'm gonna copy, go to frame 21 and paste. If you play, that's what you get. Now, what I really want is when the character goes up, I want it to hang a little and then drop, just like a bouncing ball. So I'm just going to go and open my graph editor. I'm going to go to Translate Y, and this is what I already have. Since it's going to be a walk cycle for games, I'm going to make sure that infinity is enabled, and then I'm going to go to pre-infinity cycle, post-infinity cycle. So I don't need to worry about what's going to happen after frame 28. It's just loops. Now, in order to move these tangents freely, I need to switch to weighted tangents. So I'm going to select the up keys. I'm going to go to weighted tangents. Then I'm going to right click on it and free them so I can move them with my middle mouse button freely. But again, it gets out of control really quickly, and that's why you want Shift held down. So I'm just going to select all the left tangents with Shift held down, middle mouse drag to the left, and that's how you create that hang. So if I go and play now, boom, 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 you can see that it's now very similar to a bouncing ball, where it holds a bit longer and then drops really quickly. Now let's go and switch to front view, and I'm going to bring these feet a tad closer. So selecting the controller and picking its translate X, going to bring this to positive 0.2. And again, it is up to you what you want to do, and I'm just gonna do minus 0.2. And again, it is up to you. You know, if you have that long distance, then the character will lumber side to side, which might be part of the personality, but the type of character I have, I think this will work just fine. So that side-to-side movement is not too much. Now let's switch back to side view. Now I'm going to start with the typical contact pose, and there are a lot of benefits to this pose. It's easier to start with this pose. You don't overstretch the limbs. And this pose defines the pace. The longer or the wider this pose is, it creates the wider steps and changes the pace of the walk cycle. And usually in this type of walk cycle, arms oppose legs to create that balance. Now let's go ahead and create that. With the foot control selected, I'm just going to go and place that in the contact pose. Now that looks good, so let's copy, go to frame here and paste. Now if I go to frame 14, the character's foot is at heel off pose. Now there is a control in the rig that allows me to bend the toe, which is really handy. So I am going to round this number and use that as well. Now, since we're not using pose to pose and we're not setting tangents to linear, then what we're getting is some really weird motion right in the middle of each pose, but don't let that distract you. For now, let's go with what we have and then we'll fix it along the way. Now I'm going to focus on a passing pose, and usually this pose happens 2-3 frames after the midpoint. So the passing pose is usually happening in 60% of the walk cycle that we have, which is going to be around frame 17. You can usually see in the character that the hip is rising and the back leg comes through. So let's go to around 17. As for the other foot, it has to be planted thoroughly on the ground, so check that. Now I would like to get a nice foot plant as well, because right now it's hovering. We used only 3 frames in here, and because of that I'm going to use 3 frames in here. Now it's time to plant the foot right at the beginning after the contact pose. Around this time frame I want the foot to be planted on the ground. We use 3 frames here, so let's use 3 frames in here as well. Go to frame 3. That's more like it. I may go to frame 9 and polish this a little. We still have a little bit of rotation. I do not want that rotation. We have this value on our toe roll. I don't want that. And of course, we want this to be planted on the ground. So let's make it happen. That's better. Because just by adding only 5 keys, we can have a really nice foot going back, which is great. Now you may want to use this for a game engine, and you need to make sure this cycle doesn't have any sliding. So if I go to, with the foot control selected, if I go to graph editor and look at translate Z, just make sure this line is straight, it's not broken, otherwise you get a really nasty sliding in your footstep. Now if I go to frame, so up to here it's okay, but in here, frame 19, this needs to raise a little. So I'm just going to do that. That's better now. So it raises a little and then pushes forward, which is kind of natural to what you see in most walk cycles. If I select the foot control and go over it again, around here, it's just too high. I would like to lower this down a little, have it closer to the ground level. It's just a little bit unnatural to have this foot very high. So let's take care of that too. I'm going to go to maybe frame 24. Yeah, that should do it. Now if I play again, yep, much better. Now I'm quite happy with what I have right now, so let's go ahead and work on the root a little. I'm going to go to the very first frame, and it would be nice to have a little bit of moving forward, sort of 9. Yep, that's definitely better. And again, whatever you do, you just want to make sure that when you make a change, you copy and paste that as well. Yeah, I'd really want that arc here for the spine. I would like to exaggerate that a little. Once we add side-to-side movements and a little bit of more interactivity for the hip, then it really shows itself. I actually reduced this to 5. I think 9 was a bit much, so I reduced this to 5 for all the keyframes for rotation X. So that looks much better now. All right, good. Now, first thing I would like to add to the hip is a rotate Y. So if I go and kind of get the rotation, that's the type of movement that I would like to add right now. So I'm going to go to Graph Editor, find rotate Y. Right now we have absolutely no motion. So what I want is on frame 14 to have no rotation at all. So, and in frame 0, we are going to, just going to move this here so you guys can see the effect that it's having a little bit of rotation to one side. And when we go to the very end, I'm going to put in the same. So I'm going to go to frame 14 and I'm going to put in a reciprocal value. So as you can see now, I'm getting that sort of movement. If you think it's too much, which I think it is a little, I can just reduce this to 7 and reduce these two to -7. Now, I still need to go and cycle this, pre and post infinity. Now, what I need to do is to create a little bit of movement in rotate X. And once I create that, I'm going to create an overlap and offset in conjunction with rotate Y. So let's do that. Now I want this to work with my translate Y. First things first, I'm just going to go and create post infinity and pre-infinity for this guy. Now what I want to do is to select translate X, select all of them, shift middle mouse drag to this. I want this rotation to happen right in the middle of translating the hip. So I'm going to select everything, move them a few frames back. So right now I'm on frame -4, which is, you know, it's maybe bring it back to -3. Yep. Let's have a look right now. Yeah, that definitely adds a little bit of randomness to the whole thing, which is really good. I may actually, if I'm looking at rotate X, I may bring these 3 down to 4 and bring these 2 down to 6. I feel like it's a little bit too much. Yeah, that's more subtle. It's definitely more like it. By the way, I'm playing 28 frames. Kinda shouldn't. I should go and look at 27 frames because frame 27 and 28 are identical to just get a better pace and get her speed. But right now, it looks better. Okay, moving back to frame 28. Now with that, let's go and copy what we have on this foot and paste that on the other foot. So right now this one works and the other one not only doesn't work but also flips to left and right. Let's see what's going on in here exactly. Maybe I'm just going to actually delete that. I don't want to have anything in on this right now, and let's get copy keys to the other foot. Now the way I do it, I shift drag from frame 1 to frame 28 and copy and go to the other foot. I'm gonna halfway through the timeline, whatever frame rate you're working with, and right click, paste, paste. Now if I play, now you may see that nothing is happening in here because, again, as we mentioned, it is really important to cycle the animation. Now if I go and hide the curves, we are getting the movement. Now it's not exactly spot on. This move is going a little bit on the towards the, or shifting towards the left hand side, simply because some of these values are reversed and we need to take care of them. So let's go ahead and tweak some of these values manually using our beloved graph editor. We can actually go ahead and tweak some of these attributes. So I'm going to start with translate X. If you remember, we did set this to positive 0.2, but because we copied everything from this foot to the other one, then we kind of lost that. So let's go to translate X, select everything, and instead of minus 0.2, we are going to do positive 0.2. Well, that was an easy fix. Sometimes you see really odd behavior. You just need to flip the values. So you go to scale, option box, and flip the values in scale pivot to -1. And that hopefully should fix the problem if you're encountering it. Good. Let's move to the other foot. And let's observe the walk cycle really closely. Now, first things first, we need to address some of these initial poses that we had in the other foot. Moving to frame 28, I need to use this value here. And again, it can be quite identical to what you had in this one right here. You can just have a look at the value. So we used -30 in here. So let's go ahead and select it for the other foot, the toe roll, and we can just use -30. That's better. And then we need to again have a look at what we used, how many frames we used, and how we did it for this foot right here. So only 1, 2, 3 frames after that, we got rid of it. So let's do that for the other one. 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to switch back to 0. That should do it. And again, from 28, Now what I can do, I can use my middle mouse, and that middle mouse truly helps. So in here, I'm just going to use middle mouse up to frame 24 and insert a key. So during that, it's not going to be moved. And right here until frame 27, I'm going to do that. Let's see what we're getting here. Yep. Now minus 30. So if we plan to cycle it, then we're not going to get any problem, and that should fix it. Fantastic. All right, by the look of it, we got the foot plans out of the way. Let's go and do a quick observation. And in the next video, we are going to target the hip, the spine, and the movement of the hands, which is really, really straightforward. All right, that's great. See you in the next video then.